Beware, spoiler phobes! You have stumbled into a storm of spoilers. This podcast is split into two sections. In the first, calm section, Neil and I will cover the third episode of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, titled The Squire, where the show finally revealed Egg's identity, and as a bonus, showed us an enthusiastic horse/squire training montage. In the second, storm section, we still have things to talk about besides Aegon, so Neil will use his knowledge of the book series and the next episode preview to enlighten us about where the season is going for the remaining 3 episodes. We're not ruining, we're enriching.
The realm. Do you know what the realm is? It's the 1,000 blades of Aegon's enemies. A story we agreed to tell each other over and over till we forget that it's a lie. But what do we have left once we abandon the lie? Chaos. A gaping pit waiting to swallow us all. Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder.
Why, hello again. I'm Dave Gonzalez, and I have not read any of the books in George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series.
And I'm Neil Miller, and I have read all of the books in George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire universe, including The Hedge Knight, upon which this series is based.
And welcome back to A Storm of Spoilers. Just a little bit about our upcoming schedule. Don't skip this. It is important because the next episode of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms will be dropping this Friday to avoid conflicts with Sunday's Archimedes, the most superb owl, as decided by listeners of Trial by Content. So that means you're going to get an episode of this podcast on Saturday for your weekend. So you could watch the episode. My understanding is it drops Friday at midnight Eastern. You could watch it, and the next day we'll be in your feeds talking about it. And while we're here, we're halfway through A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, going by like a flash, here for a good time, not a long time. And just want to let you know, if you're subscribed to A Storm of Spoilers, what we're going to be doing next. Neil and I love kaiju and enjoy Apple Television for its propensity to spend a lot of money on some pretty crazy ideas. So we are going to be hopping over to catch Monarch Legacy of Monsters Season 2. I'm at least very interested in the kaiju, but also the human story about a very messy man who tried to keep 2 families over a period of time. A Japanese family and a family in San Francisco is now become, I believe, where we left Monarch Legacy of Monsters. They had found a portal to another universe that was different from the Godzilla x Kong universe. Can't wait to figure out what's happening this season, but that's what we're going to be doing on A Storm of Spoilers. Okie dokie. If you would like to get in touch with the show, we need your questions about A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. We need your well-meaning corrections, as you will see as we get into this week's episode. Any theories you have about what's going on, and any lore questions you have for the storm. If you too are book readers or curious about being a book reader, make sure to send those to stormofspoilers@gmail.com. We got your emails this week. But you could also review us on the Apple Podcast app or Spotify, where you could also leave comments and leave us a 5-star review. You could say whatever you want if you do that. We don't have any reviews this week, but we do always appreciate them. Now, you could watch Neil and I and our beautiful faces and my semi-stormy thematic t-shirt, I've been told, but I don't know how much sigils or storm spots. But we are both at youtube.com at Storm of Spoilers and at Da7e and Neil. That's Da7e and Neil. Eventually, this podcast, because it's called A Storm of Spoilers, will just go in the Storm of Spoilers channel. So make sure you are subscribed there if you like these faces or like to have us on in the background, and YouTube's your app of choice. I appreciate that as well. And if you would like to get more of the content that's at youtube.com/DaveandNeil, Neil and I do a lot of coverage of television, of movies, of video games, and you could find that at patreon.com/DaveandNeil. It's Da7e and ANDNEIL. And we are also rewatching Hannibal the NBC series that
Mhm.
got away with a lot. We just saw some blurred butt over on a show that aired at NBC. And we are in the third season of 3 seasons on Hannibal. So it is a great time to eat the rude every Sunday. And this Sunday, you could watch along with us right before you check out that superb owl. Okay, Neil, I've talked enough.
Mhm.
What happened this week in the Seven Kingdoms?
Well, Dave, it's all about the dutiful Squire Egg, who begins this episode by bonding with Thunder the horse. He then meets a mad wandering knight with an eye patch. He learns how to sew from Dunk. He eats a bacon and goose egg Sammy. He watches Prince Arian do something horrible. He shares short king wisdom about tall tales. He attends another play, and he ultimately reveals his true hair color, which is dun dun dun. Targaryen silver. And there we have it, the first big reveal of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms.
I think it worked incredibly well. We are going to talk a little bit how it worked for people who weren't expecting it.
Mm-hmm.
But I appreciate the show's primary dedication to 3 episodes where basically in the first scene, we see someone relieve themselves or something relieve themselves as we get to see Thunder take some poops this episode. We're taking ourselves seriously, but not that seriously. But I did, I guess, want to talk a little bit about, something that makes this episode, I think, a very good episode of television. But first, I do think we should get to some of these correction ravens before people rage quit the podcast thinking that we are ignoring them.
For sure. And some of them do have, they've been moved up from storm topics to calm topics thanks to this week's final moments, which, here's the thing I appreciate about this show, Dave, is that they did the egg reveal exactly where I said they would. And I love it when a Game of Thrones show makes me look smart. But here are some things that I said that weren't that smart. And thank you to folks for correcting me. We got a comment correction on Spotify from a user named Tails. Apparently, last week we were doing In the Storm, the family tree of the Targaryens, most notably the sons of Maekar. Who is Maekar the Missing this week. It was not to be found. He was out there looking for his 2 sons. Little did he know, at least one of them was in camp this whole time, where I said that Aemon was the youngest and Egg was older. That is actually not true, and I should have known because in the story, the legendary story, Aemon gives up the throne. He's to become a maester. So Aemon is the 3rd son of Maekar, and Egg is the youngest. So that is a correction we can now make in the calm, which is pretty great. We also had some banner corrections. We were talking about the way banners changed, and these also came from Spotify. The first one was from user DA, who pointed out that Jon Snow's banner was not necessarily just changed because he became the King of the North. And like, it wasn't just changed on a whim to the white wolf on gray for like his dire wolf ghost. It is more of a bastard thing to just invert the colors. And this is something that you see in the Blackfires, which, if the Dunk and Egg stories keep going, we will encounter some Blackfires. They were pretty big in this era, where they took the Targaryen red dragon on black background and inverted it to a black dragon on a red background. So that's how you know that the Blackfires are coming. And we got another correction from Gabby, who pointed out, we talked about in the same discussion, we were talking about the changing sigils. We talked about how Robert Baratheon added the crown to his stag. That is actually something that only happens in the show.
Oh, okay.
And as Gabby pointed out, in the books, the Baratheons always had the crown on their stag, something to do with being the Storm Kings or Storm Lords. They've always sort of been the Lords of the Stormland. And the crown has always sort of been around the stag's neck in their sigil. So, the show, the Game of Thrones sort of made some stuff up. And there are some things that this show is making up, but we'll get to that here in a little
That
bit.
is that last one from Gabby, totally my fault, because I was like, "Hey Neil, didn't this thing in the show happen?" And you were like, "Yes."
Yeah.
So, but it's apparently something different happened in the book. So sorry to lead you into that.
We
one,
were
at
right
least.
that it happened in the show.
Yes. Factually correct, but more factually incorrect
Sure.
the deeper you go on the onion. I like that. So now that we have sort of like opened this up, I do think that I want to go to Pat's Raven next, if you don't mind, because I think that the beginning of this episode, sort of working on a couple of different levels for me, also begins at the end with the reveal about Aegon. So what did Pat have to say for us this week?
Well, and this is another thing we asked for in the storm, a Game of Thrones tradition, if you will, which is seeking the reaction of people who don't know what's coming, all the way back to the Red Wedding. And listen, this is not Red Wedding level reveal, but it's a pretty good one, especially in the context of this show. I would say this show has only a few big twists and turns or surprises, and this is like the biggest of them. And we get to read an email from Pat. And listen, I don't think we can say that a season of Storm of Spoilers in Westeros begins until we get a Pat email. So here it is. Pat says, last night, Lisa, his wife, and I had friends over. I've read the novellas. Lisa has not. Our friend Jason had not read the novellas, but had been previously informed through online osmosis that Egg was a Targaryen. He had kept this info from his girlfriend, Jess, who did not know. At the end of the episode, when Egg called Aerion brother and the music swelled, Lisa and Jess both gasped. They had not figured it out until that moment, although Lisa confided in me that she knew something was going on with Egg because he was so educated and worldly in regards to the chivalry of Westeros. Job well done, show, keeping things under the radar while also giving us clues that would click into place after the reveal. Dave, I know you knew this was coming.
Yeah.
But how do you feel like the show, how good of a job did the show do in pulling this off, in hiding Egg's truth in plain sight before revealing here at the end of the episode?
I think it did a great job in terms of hiding and at least deflecting that this was an important thing that the series had to do. So up until the end of episode 3, I'd say there's like two camps of people watching it. There are those that know, and for those that know, I think if you go back to our storm sections, there's lots of moments when, you know, Egg has to come down off of Dunk's shoulders when like the the Targaryens are overlooking the crowd, when he sort of wants to go back to camp when the Targaryen host arrives. All these sort of things that while they were happening, we sort of knew why they were happening. And in the show, they just sort of had to play off as, I guess it helps the size differential in terms of like playing that off, where we really want to believe that Egg is like like our hero, just like a virtuous person trying to like bootstrap themselves and is after like a simpler life, which I appreciate, but I could never, fully know what living in that part of the story is, because even before the series was greenlit, what I knew about Dunk and Egg was who Egg was, because I was like, oh, is this like a weird like mushroom character where the name's weird? And you guys let me know what happened. So that being said, this episode especially, I think, is incredibly more heartfelt if you know going in what the end of the episode's revealing. Sort of like Egg waking up, sleeping on the ground, which is presumably something he doesn't do often, immediately training with the horse, and not training with the horse from any sort of... He does mention that his brother, or which one of his family members is basically like their dogs. They're dumb as dogs. Anyway, he has this story about
one of his uncles.
One of the Targaryens disrespecting horses. And Egg's like, but I don't think that. And the horse nods back at him.
That's his father. He says Maekar says that horses are dumb as dogs.
dumb Makar. I see why they call him an anvil. It's idiot. Anyway, but all of these things and all of his appreciation, such as like, a meal that for I think Dunk is like super luxurious, which for him would be kind of like rustic and fun. Like all of these different things, I think play so much better if he's a princeling masquerading and wanting a simple life. Especially the conversation that they have, sort of overlooking the tournament, and Egg's like, I could live like this. And instead of being aspirational, like it would be if he was actually from Flea Bottom, it's actually much more down to earth, where he doesn't want the trappings of royalty for various reasons. Maybe also because his brother's insane, but that's I think part that really plays well. And maybe this is like an episode that's made to be rewatchable. That's definitely something that could pull into this. And maybe they're hoping that the reveal triggers a rewatch immediately of the previous episodes, which would also benefit them. But for those of us that live in Spoiler Town, I think this episode played incredibly more heartfelt going into it, because we had that extra layer of knowledge about Egg's character. And I am surprised they kept this reveal so long, considering like presumably the two other novels take place with everybody knowing this, unless Dunk really gets hit on the head here in the last couple of episodes. But yeah, I think it was very well executed. But also, Neil, I'll throw this back to you. Do you think this season is going to be remembered as the season with the twist? So like, I guess the best example I would have is the first season of The Mandalorian. People loved it. But if you go back and think about it now, the big thing that happened is like the Grogu reveal. The reveal that Grogu was there, and the reveal that Grogu was like a Force user. And now if you sort of like watch that season, all of that stuff are the highlight moments, but all the rest is sort of lowered in importance, because as the series went on, we already knew who Grogu was. Is that what's happening here, or has this twist been artfully executed to the point where the twist is like the pillar of the season?
I don't necessarily know if it's going to be the pillar of the season. I mean, it is very important and very significant. And obviously going forward, it is very important that Egg is one of the Targaryen princes. I also very much agree that this episode plays very differently if you know the twist going in. Not only is it heartfelt, but I also think that they do several very interesting things hiding Egg's truth in plain sight. Like when he is introduced, when Dunk introduces him to Raymond Fossaway, and he's just sort of like looks away and looks down and is very sheepish toward him. You can kind of tell that he doesn't want to be recognized, right? Because Raymond Fossaway is the kind of person who might recognize him. And then I love the moment where, this is directly from the books, where during Aryann's jousting, he's screaming like, kill him, kill him. It's a very little brother, big brother moment.
Yes.
Like he clearly does not like his older brother. And we just don't know that that's his older brother yet. But one of the things that I clocked, and I'm sure that a lot of folks also appreciated the closing credits music, which brought a big smile to my face for several reasons. One, it's an epic way to go out on an amazing line where Egg just absolutely devastates his older brother with the line. And again, directly from the book. This is a George special. And I love that other than the Raymond Fossaway's little political rant about the Targaryens, the final 8 minutes of this episode are like a word for word from the book, The Hedge Knight. Like all the dialogue, all the action beats, like the way it plays out is pretty much exactly how, like all the way down to like the way Egg calls out his brother's guards by name is all directly from the book, which I think is great. And that last line, and then it kicks in with that music. Not only is it sort of epic, but I also think that it signals a really interesting tonal shift. Because I was and I was thinking about this as I was on Twitter, the Everything app, earlier today, and I saw somebody tweeting out a screenshot of the Rotten Tomatoes scores for this series so far. And currently it sits at like a 95% from critics and like a 65% from the audience score.
Mm.
And the poster said, you know, who is not enjoying this show, like not understanding how anyone could be like against this show. And I was reading through some of the responses, and there were a lot of people like saying, oh, this show just doesn't match the tone of the previous Game of Thrones stuff, right? Like, I'm a big fan of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, and I'm gonna assume that these are folks who are not book readers. They're more show watchers first. And they're like, this just isn't my flavor of Game of Thrones. And here's where they have been slightly misled. They probably went into this, and the show has done this to them. This is not necessarily their fault in these first 3 episodes, and they've been presented with what appears to be a buddy comedy.
Right.
And we know, well, I say we, book readers, people who have taken in the oeuvre of George R.R. Martin, know that even when George starts off writing a buddy comedy, eventually it becomes a George R.R. Martin book. And eventually some fucked up shit is going to happen. Right? Like, as soon as the Targaryens show up, as soon as Aerion impales a horse through the neck, and we begin to have like riots. And I think this musical cue is very important in the sense that, you know, without getting too stormy here in the calm, the tone of this story shifts dramatically from here on out, as you could probably presume, given the fact that like Dunk is in custody at the end of this one, and
right.
he and Egg's relationship is going to be a little rocky going forward. So I think that this show has done a little bit of a sleight of hand on people, where everyone has been lulled into a sense of safety and comedy with these first couple of episodes. And I'm sure there will still be some fun moments, but my assumption, which so far my instincts have been correct, that the back half of this show this season is going to be a lot darker and more in line with a Game of Thrones show that people are expecting, especially non-book readers are expecting. And that's one of the things I really liked about that musical cue at the end, because I was like, okay, this matches the moment that we're in, and I think clears the way for where we're going, which is down a much darker path. And like, things sort of spiral from here, as you might imagine. So I think it's kind of interesting. So I hope people stick with it. Like, the folks who are not into it right now and are like, this isn't my flavor of Game of Thrones, because rest assured, this is an adaptation of George R.R. Martin, and all of the things that made Game of Thrones came from George, right? Like, they were, because those first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones were very faithfully adapted, right? Like, and I think we lose sight of that because of the way the original Thrones ended, and the way Weiss and Benioff sort of checked out and, you know, forgot about the Iron Fleet there at the end. And we forget that it was because they were faithfully adapting George's text that we really, really got into those characters. And when George wrote A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, yes, he was having more fun, but he was very much on his A game when it came to delivering some gnarly stuff. And it is all in the back half of this story. So stick with it, friends, because here it comes.
Hey, well, then I'm going to linger on the pleasantness of this episode. I hate, this is probably the last time I'm going to return directly to the horse training, but something like that, then having this also be the episode where a horse is impaled with a lance through the neck.
Sure. I tried to warn you as best I could without fully spoiling it, that as much as, there are delightful moments with horses and I guess sad moments when we sell Sweetfoot, there's also some terrible things that happen to horses in this story.
Yes.
Classic George.
But I do think it is the type of I call it like the save the cat mentality, which is a screenwriting book. But the idea behind that being that in order to signal to your heroes who the protagonists and antagonists are, very often it's about how kind they are to animals. So having that be like a central point to this ongoing Targaryen conflict that I'm calling Dragon Brother versus Night Brother, that Egg seems to be having here, where he would really like to stay on Dunk's service, and Dunk thinks that is more dependent on his win, I think, than it really is. And then we have Dragon Brother, who is revealing himself to not only be an asshole, but basically insane.
Sure.
As much as the television show can broadcast to me that this guy is not, worth me worrying about. Where it does pull back in terms of that tone that people are missing from Game of Thrones is like him just breaking her finger, Talise's finger. Talise is
Tancel.
Rob's wife. Tancel breaking Tancel's finger, I imagine, is like just the beginning, and to a much more horrible thing, like how he was going to break out Dunk's teeth. So I do like that we have this episode where we have a very direct, here's how horrible things can get for like this horse, but we aren't, I think, reveling in how horrible things were in the Middle Ages quite yet.
Sure.
I imagine we'll get there, because George R. R. Martin does like using his fictional universe to show us something that isn't that far off from real history, and real history is horrid. So I could appreciate that we're going somewhere, but I do like this episode, especially hearing from you that it might be a full tonal pivot episode, how they're able to set us up with where we need to be with both of these characters for that tonal shift. Because after 3 episodes, I'm totally on board with who Dunk is. The first episode, I'm like, he's a simple guy who wants some money by becoming a knight. By the second episode, I'm like, no, he's actually like after some sort of lore. And then here, I think it sort of hints that, that lore could be maybe become legend. And I am really on board with that arc. Egg, I think this episode does a lot to set up and how much he wants to like live a simpler life and how excited he is by that. So even if there is a big tonal shift, or I don't even know if you call it a tonal shift halfway through, if the plot starts happening all of a sudden, I know exactly who these characters are going into it. So I think that's job well done television series.
I also really like, speaking of this, the scene with Arion and the horse, the way this scene is executed, I thought was really well done, because it also illuminates the sort of vibes of the times, right? Because we're sort of in a slightly different time, obviously, than House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones. When we pick up in Game of Thrones, the Targaryens are out of power, right? Robert has defeated them by killing Rhaegar. And in House of the Dragon, the Targaryens are at the height of their power because they still have dragons. But here, I think what's very important is that we see in Arion the continued arrogance of believing that they are still the dragon, right? Like it's Viserys, it's Daenerys's brother, but he's actually still lives in Westeros, kind of thing. And I love that they cut to Baelor's reaction as well after he kills the horse, and Baelor's like, fuck, man, this kid, like my nephew, my shit ass nephew, is screwing things up, because we just saw him last week in the last episode be like, we have to be diplomatic. He's trying to be as the next in line. He's trying to be the new kind of Targaryen ruler, like his father Daeron the Good, who is really trying to unite the kingdom and change this view of the Targaryens that they can rule through like soft power, right? Because they no longer have their nuclear weapons. So they have to be more diplomatic, and they have to rule with more tact. And this is the kind of shit that they don't need these days. And we see the immediate result, which is the peasants, the small folk, immediately start revolting, throwing shit. The King's Guard has to come in and get involved. And, we see the tension where the small folk are not super into the Targaryens at the moment. And I think that is an important piece of context in the longer arc of the story of Dunk and Egg.
If I have learned one thing from digesting all of the existing George R. R. Martin, A Song of Ice and Fire television shows, and I'm going to say it, playing Elden Ring, a Targaryen is a Targaryen's worst enemy. The inner threat of these crazy incestuous aliens seems to constantly be stopping them from ruling the Seven Kingdoms effectively. Whether that be infighting or just a whole sect sort of breaks off, which is my understanding of the Blackfires, just from a song this week, is it's those guys. You gotta watch out for your own family,
right?
If you're a Targaryen, for sure. Maybe that's why Robert's Rebellion also works out.
It's not just the Targaryens that lose the coin flip, but it's the bastard Targaryens who think that they should rule instead.
Yeah. Or I guess, anybody who's born with the Targaryen silver spoon in their mouth is, ends up having some weird decisions about ruling, is what I've learned about this universe.
For sure.
Can't wait to see if Egg is one of those or not. I definitely want to talk about the fortune teller in the storm. But before I get into some other corners, one other thing that made me wonder about this episode is I did really much enjoy Alice Three Fingers.
Sure.
And the discussion that Alice Three Fingers spurred in Egg and Dunk. And it sort of seems like how legends are made and what is important to remember about those legends, if it is like deed or if it is name. And I do appreciate that in this world, songs are very important. I mean, give me a fantasy medieval universe where somebody pledges to write a song for somebody. Absolutely love it. But it is sort of weird that Egg, as a educated person and literate person in this world, makes no reference to like people being remembered through books.
Sure.
Which I'm sure is fine. I just feel like that's a weird decision and something that George R. R. Martin would probably think about. But maybe he would like to distance that idea after Game of Thrones basically ended with Sam being like, maybe it's called Game of Thrones.
Well, interestingly enough, this Alice with Three Fingers thing, at least as far as I can tell, is not from the books. It is a show original. So this is something that the show has sort of added. And what's interesting to me is it's sort of in lieu of a more involved jousting sequence or tourney sequence that also involved like, Lionel Baratheon having a big jousting moment in the books. And there's a battle of the Humphreys, which is a Sir Humphrey Harding versus Sir Humphrey Beesbury moment that we don't get. Now, we do get Sir Humphrey Harding. He's the guy with the red and white diamond shield, who is his horse is the one who gets skewered and he gets his leg slammed on. He is notable. That's a notable house that we should put up on the board in our house spotting segment. Sir Humphrey Harding.
I was wondering who the Diamond House was.
Yep.
The Hardings.
House Harding. He may or may not get some dialogue later. Who knows? But he's definitely in a lot of pain. Get that man some milk of the poppy.
That's a good question. Do you get paid line rate for just screaming?
I hope so. I mean, I know that the actor himself did not actually break his leg, but and no horses were harmed in the making of this episode. But it's a pretty good scream, so I hope he got paid well. But in the books, there's other like jousts leading up to the moment with Arion, where there's like multiple different like big jousts of the day that they sort of trade that for this moment in the tent with Lionel and the song. And I think it actually works really well because, again, it does a lot to set up the dynamic between Dunk and Egg, and also sort of Egg's wisdom, I guess, his little short king wisdom that he has, that I guess would seem to be mysterious and out of place if he were actually an orphan from Flea Bottom. But now that we know that he is a Targaryen prince who was raised in the Red Keep of King's Landing, it makes more sense. But I like the song. I think it's fun. If you watch the behind the scenes, you will note that Daniel Ing plays Lionel Baratheon, had a really, really interesting time shooting this because he kept forgetting the words. And it's very entertaining. I highly recommend watching it, where he just keeps screwing up the song, and also was very concerned about swearing in front of Dexter Saul Ansel, the actor who plays Egg, which is funny because like Dexter Saul Ansel also has some cursing to do as Egg. But it's a funny cut moment in the behind the scenes because it cuts to Dexter being interviewed and he's like, I really don't like cursing, but I do it because it's my job. And it's just delightful.
What? Yeah. I'm so we've heard from HBO since that they do intend this to be an annual series.
Mm-hmm.
So it does look like we will be getting more Night of the Seven Kingdoms, and they're hoping for it to be next year.
Sure.
Which I think is great because I do like these characters, and we'll probably loop back to this in some future Storm segment because who knows time-wise if that's even possible given the stories that already exist. But I'm having a great time with this cast as they exist, and a great time learning these side nights. In terms of how the adaptation choices, is the thing where Dunk thinks he's going to joust today and Egg has to tell him like the first day is just for sort of nights of note, is that from the novella, or is that a rule to sort of postpone and allow us to have this? I don't know if that conversation is directly from the books, but the rule is generally true from the books, where it's like the highest born knights go first. And it is also part of the book where on this first day of the tournament, Dunk spends a lot of time concerned with who he is going to challenge. And, he starts thinking about, should I challenge Prince Valar? Maybe that's a little bit too high up the ladder, right? Like that's the crown prince. Like that would be silly, and you'd probably get laughed out of the room for that one. Now, what I will say is that it is interesting to me that the moment with the Master of Games offering Dunk the throne match against Sir Andro of House Ashford, that is not in the books. This is a completely added plot line, which I also think is kind of interesting. Because like Sir Andro is in the book and he has a couple of different matches, but Dunk is never sort of offered this because, as you can imagine, Dunk's participation in the tournament is now going to be in question based on the fact that he is in custody. Right.
For punching out a prince. And so he never quite gets to decide who he's going to fight in the books. But this part I thought was really sort of an interesting little addition that the show makes. And these are really fascinating to me because, again, the show, we're padding out the story for 30-minute episodes. So these are really sort of big choices that they're making. And this one is sort of interesting because it's a important choice that leads to nothing anyway, right? Because it's like that match was never going to happen. As it's happening, I was like, I don't remember this from the books. Also, I don't think this is going to matter either way because Dunk's about to get into some shit anyway. So I thought that was I don't know how I feel about that, but I do think that it's really just there to like further show us how honorable Dunk is, how just sort of how
Right.
turned off he is by the idea of being part of a throne match. And I don't think there was any chance of him really ever going through with that, despite how down on his luck he is and how much he really needs the win. Had Dunk been able to get into the tournament in the normal way and not had an altercation with Arian, I think he would have chosen to challenge a different knight and not Ashford's son.
It's also like it's a great isolating of Dunk's character in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, where there are very few people who, given a win-win situation like that, I don't want to say people like they existed, characters who, given a win-win situation like that, wouldn't take it immediately. And so the fact that Dunk doesn't, I think, really anchors him in a great way,
Sure.
or in a horrifying way, if like you're saying this is like the happiest Dunk's ever going to be, or not saying, inferring.
And it's funny because as we learn from Raymond Fossaway, like Stefan Fossaway 100% would have taken the deal. Right. Like as his cousin is talking about him, I was thinking, well, if they offer him the throne match, he's taking it. So,
absolutely.
Dunk stands alone as the truly honorable knight. And that is, again, one of the core themes here, which is like what makes someone a truly honorable knight in this world where there isn't actually a lot of honorable stuff going on.
Do they talk about in the book how broke the Ashford house is putting on this tourney? Or is that also the show invention?
It's not as prominent as it is here, but I do think they mention Lord Ashford kind of overspending a little bit. But I don't think it's as big of a deal as they make it out to be. I mean, Lord Ashford is in the books, and so far what we've seen here is kind of an idiot, and is maybe in over his head, especially given how many of the Targaryens have shown up to this thing. But
the standout Ashfords are undoubtedly Game Master Flem and his daughter.
Sure, his daughter.
I will take more of both of those characters whenever they would like to give them to me. But otherwise, House Ashford just seems fine. Just seems like they're getting by.
Yeah.
I don't have a ton of sympathy.
That's a pretty good spot, I guess.
Yes. And it's not their fault. I don't have a ton of sympathy for Reach houses complaining about winter. I feel like,
Yeah, I mean,
they're fine.
They're gonna be fine.
They're
Highgarden will send a cart full of gold to them and they'll be good.
Everything will be just fine. Cool. We get some food finally this episode, which I have always been told is a George R. R. Martin favorite. You and I have watched lots of television shows that have focused on food. Right now, as I mentioned at the top, doing some Hannibal, which has some beautiful and beautifully gross food. But I do like a good breakfast sandwich. Neil, is this a novella-inspired breakfast
100%.
sandwich? Or oh, love it. Tell me about it.
Yep, bacon, goose egg, and fried bread. This, again, part of my theory as to why George R. R. Martin really likes Ira Parker, the showrunner of this show, is the food stuff. He's very into the food stuff. We didn't get enough of that in the original Thrones. We're not getting like any of that in House of the Dragon. Then again, Fire and Blood doesn't have a whole lot of like food descriptions. So I love that this is like direct from the books. This is the breakfast that Dunk and Egg have, because it sounded delicious when I read it, and it looks delicious in the show. Like, this is probably the most delicious thing we've seen on screen from this world so far, I would say. But I also wanted to shout out the homemade, or I guess bespoke, famed Fossaway hard apple cider. As a cider enjoyer myself, I would like to try the famous cider of the Red Apple House. I imagine that was, especially compared to what I imagine medieval mead tasted like, as Egg points out, probably kind of gross. The apple cider is probably dope. Like,
oh yeah,
in comparison, for sure.
I mean, I would also imagine you can't have a apple as your sigil and be bad at apple foods.
Right.
That's just that the one thing you're probably expected to be good at is some sort of applery. So cider, great. I'm gonna kick back a little bit on the ale. Ale is just bread that you made wrong. So
Guess
I
that's
think
true.
that they probably have some okay tasting ale at this point. They've been doing it for a while.
Sure. Although I
Uh,
would say if you had to rank them though, like the cider is up there. The wine of the Reach I know is famously very good. And then the
Nice.
ale is probably third on the list at best.
Yeah, I mean they have like the stuff to make it again. If they're the food area, they have all
Sure.
the best hops and what have you.
Sure.
So
But
maybe
nothing
they,
touches a Dornish red, in my opinion.
Oh, very, very, very fair. I think in this sort of world where it is probably about the ingredients, wine and ciders definitely going to stand out. I think a little bit more than ales, which I hope is everywhere and I hope is just fine. Strong liquid bread. That's what the poor folk need across Westeros. Say me.
Yep.
And then we of course have the play that ultimately gets some fingers broken. And I'm just now realizing that Dunk threatened to punch Egg. He keeps threatening to punch Egg, but doesn't, and then he finally does make his brother eat a fist. I appreciate that. Good job, writers. This week's play looked like it was just the mirror shield one, but done again. Did I miss something?
It's not. But here's what's interesting about it. It is not like a famous story. It's just a knight defeating a dragon. Like there's no significant story to it, at least not in the books. Because in the book, it plays out the same way it plays here in the show, where we are following Dunk and Raymond Fossaway in their tent having this conversation, and Egg runs in to get him. So like we don't see the play out. We actually get more of it here in the show. And what I think is interesting, again, something that I guess was cut for time out of this 30-minute episode, is that in the books, Dunk and Egg, after the jousting events and the horrific situation with the horse, there's like 2 matinee shows of the play where the mummers do a Nymeria and her 10,000 ships play, where the mummers only have 2 ships, but they do make do with them. And that's pretty fun. And but interestingly enough, Nymeria and the 10,000 Ships is another one of the spin-offs that they're developing at HBO.
Maybe animated was the last thing we heard, I think.
Yeah. So, maybe that's why they didn't want to go down that road here, because they're eventually going to tell that in a more long form way. And there is one about Simeon Star Eyes, who is described as another Age of Heroes guy who was a knight who was blind and put sapphires in his eyes, in his empty eye sockets, as the singers claim, and fought with a long staff with blades at the ends and would spin it, around himself and be able to chop dudes up. And he once visited the Night Fort, which is all the way up on the wall, and was witness to hellhounds fighting. I don't know how he was witness. He had sapphires for eyes, but that's part of the legend. But neither of those are here, so they seem to have skipped over that part for whatever reason. But yeah, like the knight defeating the dragon isn't like a famous story. It's just like a knight defeating the dragon. And obviously Aryan takes offense to anything where a dragon dies.
Knight defeating a dragon, very classic across many cultures.
Sure.
I've been to, the Excalibur Casino in Las Vegas. Maybe it's just they had a lot of extra pollen, so they're going to do the big wow fire effect for as many people as possible at night. Maybe.
Well, and I guess
that's the best.
Not to be too fair to Aryan, because he doesn't deserve any of this. But we haven't, we've seen 2 full seasons of House of the Dragon. We haven't seen a whole lot of humans defeating dragons. right?
True.
It's really dragon on dragon violence that ends dragons for us. Like, we did see in Game of Thrones some like giant crossbows defeating dragons.
Right.
But even in Game of Thrones, a lot of the dragon stuff is either dragons killing dragons or the Night King's giant spearing a dragon. So it's sort of, maybe not canon in this world for a knight with just a shield and a sword to be able to take down a dragon. So like, he's not wrong to be like, this story kind of sucks. But I don't think it's worth breaking her finger over. He's, that's where he sort of takes it too far. His criticism, right? He could have just left a 1-star review and moved on with his life.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's also just like an aspirational thing, because if you're a small folk who are constantly being ruled by these dragon people and they're keeping all the dragons to themselves, why wouldn't you make a myth about a person that could just walk up and stab a dragon in the neck?
That's true. And that would, again, also offend the dude who thinks he's the dragon.
Yes. I obviously don't think Targaryens are aliens necessarily, but it's not the worst crazy theory I've heard about Game of Thrones when I hear it come out this week.
I mean, they are a unique race of people from old Valyria. So in the context of this world, they are sort of alien to the people, the more indigenous-ish people of Westeros.
Yes, I was taking it as that, but I guess you're right. I'm not suggesting that Planetos thinks they're extraterrestrials.
They just come from a world that no longer exists because of the Doom.
And someday they will tell me that story as Game of Thrones stretches out into infinity. And can't wait to figure out why that magic didn't work out for them, but did create a race of blonde people. Very interesting. All right. Did we miss any houses that we have to name check here?
Yes.
Yes, we did.
We definitely,
because we got a one-eyed dude, an eye patch gentleman.
Speaking of wines, we got House Riesling. Which, I mean, it's a wine in our world. I actually don't know if Riesling is a wine in Westeros, but so Robin Riesling, who I think makes a really interesting entry into our story, as notably has no shoes on, and has a killer walking stick and an awesome eye patch, and also speaks as if he
pronouns,
is a plural man. Multiple people rocking inside that dude, and we get to see what happened in 204 AC, which was at this point like a decade and a half ago, where he took a splintered jousting pole to the eye, and it took out his eye, and he just kept going. That legendarily did not stop him from competing in that particular tourney. And he's sort of a madman now, but he's kind of awesome. And he has a really great line, which I don't think is from the books. This is another maybe potentially great addition by the show, which is, "We are a vessel for the warrior. When it is madness bid, it is madness delivered." That's pretty awesome, especially for a dude who just like walked up out of the forest with no shoes on. So I very much hope that we see him again. You will note that in the flashback moment with him, we do get to see his shield, which House Riesling's banner is an oaken door banded with iron on a gray stone doorway on black masonry. It's a very cool looking shield. So hopefully he's got that somewhere. And if we see him fight potentially I assume he's coming to the tourney, or he's just like walking around.
Just walking around barefoot, doing whatever, being creepy,
just being weird. Like, there's no other reason for him to be in Ashford, I guess. So hopefully we get to see him do some stuff. I mean, in the books, he's doing tourney stuff. So like, hopefully we get to see him, them, I guess would be his pronouns, do some fighting. He seems awesome.
When they say they're a vessel for the warrior, that's the 7 warrior, right?
Yes.
So he's like, I'm a knight of the gods, essentially.
Basically, yeah. But only that one particular part of the gods, the warrior.
Okay, and he thinks he's inhabited by that, or do we not know?
It's not entirely clear.
Well,
This is kind of new. Like this part of the story is a little new for Mr. Simon Riesling. I'm excited. I'm excited that the show is going hard with him, and hopefully we get to spend more time with him over the next couple episodes.
I also hope so. And I do want to ask, I think, a little bit more about. Obviously, we're going to be talking more about the 7, I think, in the column in the coming weeks. So I don't have to worry too much about that. But I do want to talk about the fortune teller. I just want to tell our listeners fortune teller stuff's probably going to be in the storm. Because I don't want Neil being like, I will tell you. So before we transition into the storm, we do have some good humor ravens that I wanted to cover,
Sure.
which I think are important. For the first one is from Tatum. It says, do we think Egg's hair is magical because some stubble should have shown up by now? Or is it too blonde to show? Who the hell helped him shave his head actually? Because there's no way he did that good of a job alone. Magic, Neil? Magic hair shaving?
Maybe. I will say that Dexter Saul Ansel, as far as I know, is a blonde in real life.
Yes.
So it would be blonde if it was growing back in. That said, I think the reason why Egg's hair is not growing back in is because it was recently shaved. Like within the last week, right? Like it's important to remember that we're on like day 3 of knowing these characters, right? Like Dunk was at the inn like 2 days ago. And so Egg could have shaved his head like that morning for all we know. So it's not entirely weird that, it hasn't grown back yet. As to who helped him shave, I think we'll find out eventually who helped him shave. And I just did find it funny, though, that he did mention that the carpet does not match the drapes in this episode.
That's true. That dark hair coming out of his stones.
Not something I expected to learn about Egg, but here we are. Who knows? But again, as we mentioned with Baylor last week, the reason why Baylor has black hair is their grandmother, Darren's wife, is Dornish. Or was Dornish. I don't know if she's still alive at this point. So they all sort of have the potential to either have dark hair or the silvery Targaryen hair, depending on how the genetic coin flip goes for them. So I guess Egg got a little bit of both.
I am a little surprised that this is the first time we've heard that the pubic hair is dark on Targaryens, because you think that is like such a small folk insult that would have appeared in the first Game of Thrones book, given how much we cared about hair color in that tale. But I'm glad that we got it here. It's a complete fantasy world, of course, where we know about the pubic hair.
Yeah, that said, Egg's hair canonically very much blonde, like his brother.
And then I'm glad that we're going to hear some head shaving lore, because I was ready to make up my own lore about how he'd, gotten some peasants to chip in and he's been shaving peasants' heads blindfolded to teach himself the art of the blade.
I mean, when you're a blonde-haired princeling in this world, you can't have too many witnesses, man. Peasants, they like to talk. So
I think you just shave some peasants' heads. You're just like, hey, chambermaid, I'm going to shave your head. I mean, that wouldn't make me a good lord. I wouldn't be a good lord. But if I were, this email from Abby might be important. In episode 2, Dunk had to come up with a new sigil for his shield. If you both had to do the same, what would your individual sigils be? Mine would be 3 black Labradors on a turquoise field. I love this, Abby. I went way too far with it. Neil, do you have an answer?
I can't wait to hear yours. I think mine would also have dogs on it. It would probably be like a Schnauzer and a Chihuahua. And it would be a little Dornish. Like it would have to be like orange, like an orange sun in the background. And it would have like some dogs in the front. And it would be cool. It would be. You
said a Schnauzer or a Chihuahua?
Like a Schnauzer and a Chihuahua next to each other, just hanging out.
And a Chihuahua on a Dornish orange background.
Yeah. with a Dornish sun. And I don't, there wouldn't be like a shooting star or anything, but maybe some stars in the sky with the sun.
I love this.
No, that doesn't make sense. I don't know. I'm not very good at this.
I went way too deep. So first I'm like, Dave with the seven pointed something, but then I'm like, I am not a believer in the seven.
That's true. Yeah.
Learned anything of myself of Game of Thrones fandom. So I was like, canonically can't do that for myself.
Mm-hmm.
But then I was like, I do like the Dornish, and I am on, I think somewhere like a fan calendar that was doing like a calendar with timelines. I contributed my portrait to be like a Dornish Lord of Lord of Yore.
Mm-hmm.
Woo! But I don't remember which one it was. So I do like this sort of like vague Dornish.
You wouldn't have a mockingbird on yours?
No, see, I'm not that little finger coded, but I'm also not a joiner. So Neil, they used to call me in high school, one of my many nicknames. I had a bunch of nicknames. They thought it was fun, they being my friends, to give me a bunch of nicknames. One was Dirty Mongoose.
Oh,
and so I was like, hey, I like this mongoose association. So mine would be an angry mongoose in front of a orange Dornish sun with a purple background, because my house is Dornish, but isn't that into the royalty? So if there are ever any sand snakes that pop up, my natural mongooses sort of resists them. And so I picture I'm somewhere in like the Dornish mountains, like right on the border of being like Seven Kingdoms proper. But I just sort of like hold my ground and hold my lands and chase off any
an angry mongoose
intruders.
In front of the Red Mountains would be very cool.
I could do Red Mountains if you're going to take that sun, because I do like in front of the mountains. And I was talking to Java about this because, again, I took this way too seriously. She's like, how about the mountains for Colorado? I'm like, Colorado is not in Westeros. So
but
Red
the Red
Dornish
Mountains are
like
the most
this.
Colorado-ish place. I mean, it's warm there, but still, I imagine there's snow on the top of those mountains.
So I could actually probably make like the Denver flag, which is two mountains with a sun, but have the Dornish sun in between two red mountains, and then an angry mongoose in front of it, and then a purple sky background.
wow.
I think that would be me.
Yeah, yours is way better than mine. I'll have to keep giving this thought. I may amend mine by the time we end this particular Westeros era.
If you are also Dornish and I'm in the Red Mountains, we're at least narrowing down somewhere that the Citadel of Crazy Town is.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's definitely
honestly on
Dorne.
a different coast than I was expecting. I thought we would have been a little bit more north.
I mean, you know, it's in the south near the other Citadel, but it's definitely in Dorne. I don't think anyone's going to argue against that.
Good to know. And thank you so much to Abby and Tatum. We do love some emails just about how crazy it is being Westerosi, be it hair or sigils. So I think, Neil, unless we have anything that we need to tell people besides tune in next Saturday, see you next weekend. Do you want to do the migration of the Catelyn Stark Memorial ironic statement out of the storm to close us out?
Well, I have two. There's one that I will save for the storm, but I did appreciate that. And again, this comes directly from the books, that Sir Raymond Fosselway gets one that I think is a great memorial ironic statement, because it pays off immediately in this episode where he's talking about Maekar's sons. And he says, the third's so useless, they're going to send him to the Citadel and make a maester of him. We know who that is. And the youngest ... and Egg runs in immediately. And that's the youngest one. So that's kind of funny. And, you know, in the next scene, we learn who that really is. So fun times are afoot, but I've also got a really good one for the storm. So if you're not averse to a little spoileriness, stick around.
I am the storm, brother. The first storm and the last. And you're in my way.
And we are back in the storm. Neil, let's just go right off of that, because that takes me right where I want to go. What is your Catelyn Stark Memorial ironic statement here in the storm?
Well, it comes from Dunk, and it is right after the fortune teller gives them their very accurate fortune. He says, thank you, that's very good, and laughs it all off. which I thought was kind of funny. And then Egg's like, why did she say that? He's like, why did she say what? In his very Dunk way. And Egg, I guess, right to be concerned. So how much, I mean, would you like to know how accurate this is?
I mean, I think that Dunk's is accurate just because
In a very
he
general
seems
sense,
to be
yeah.
a very famous king's guide by the time Joffrey could read about him. So I know that's happening.
Mhm.
But also, I think you give that fortune to every knight if I'm a fortune teller.
Yeah.
You know,
The being richer than a Lannister thing is kind of interesting because I don't necessarily know if there's anywhere that's sort of specified. That said, Dunk is a very close friend of Egg, and Egg throughout Egg's entire life. And Egg is obviously with him throughout being a prince. Egg doesn't become king until he's in his early 30s. And then Dunk is a Kingsguard member after that. So, his earning potential is very high. Then again, the Lannisters are very rich. So I am curious to see, and obviously Ira Parker knows a lot more about the remaining 9 books, 8 books. Yes. The unpublished, 8 unpublished books of this series. No. What's 12 minus 3? 9. The 9 unpublished books of this series. He knows more about them than we do. So maybe there's other things that will lead to Dunk's richness. I assume they would come in the time that Dunk and Egg are traveling before Egg becomes king. Maybe they hit it rich at some point. So
I mean,
that's
I would love a heist. I don't know what these Dunk and Egg stories are outside of this one,
Sure.
but I think a good heist would be fun.
I do like that it leaves the potential open for a lot of different things to happen for them, and that's kind of fun. And I'm very curious as to how it's broken up, right? Because obviously the first 3 don't necessarily involve Egg becoming king. So like I wonder if like half or more than half of the stories happen before Egg becomes the king. We know a little bit about like what happens after he becomes king. There's a bunch of Blackfire rebellions that happen. There's like 4 total, and I think 3 of them happen after this story starts. So
so his song's only about the first one.
yeah.
Cool.
And so like, maybe there's some time in there where Dunk could get some big tourney wins. I imagine that's possible. That said,
yeah, I was watching with Java because Java's now on board because this is not as gross as the other Game of Thrones series,
Mhm.
and we're having a great time watching it. There were a couple of moments where she was like, and like one is eyeball hanging out and the other is horse gets stabbed through the neck, which I really appreciated.
Mhm.
But when Fortune Teller goes, you'll be king, I think we both smiled a little bit. But then die in a fire and like people will rejoice. Both of us were like, oh no. And she was like, what does that mean? I'm like, I don't know. I haven't read these books.
Yeah. So there is some canon lore here that is important to note about Egg's demise, which I think we talked about in the storm either last week or the week before, which is the tragedy of Summerhall. Summerhall, which is currently where Egg's father Maekar lives. It's where the sort of second son, second level prince lives, whereas the next in line for the crown lives at Dragonstone. Summerhall, a castle that does not exist in the time of Game of Thrones because of this tragedy. It burns down in this fire. And Egg dies in it. Egg's first son dies in it. His son, whose name is also Duncan, dies. Sir Duncan the Tall dies in it, this fire. And this fire happens the day that Rhaegar Targaryen is born at Summerhall. And here's the thing. The way this fire starts is that King Aegon V, Aegon the Unlikely, formerly known as Egg the Squire, is convinced in his older years that the only way for the Targaryens to maintain power or bring back their true power is by bringing back dragons. And
Boo.
the reason why this fire starts, allegedly, we don't really know the details, is that he was trying to hatch dragon eggs, which means he had in his possession some dragon eggs, which may or may not also be dragon eggs that end up in the possession of Daenerys Targaryen. That eventually, I mean, how many sets of dragon eggs are there in that particular time period, right?
Right, and that would have been the exact same time where they're sort of like sent.
Like we're
to be
tracking
safe somewhere.
we're tracking Daenerys's eggs all the way back to like Rhaenyra having them. So like I think these are very likely the same dragon eggs that eventually hatch into like Drogon and Rhaegal and the other one, Viserion.
Yay!
Yeah,
Viserion.
So like Egg tries to hatch them, it goes wrong. They burn down the entirety of Summerhall and they all die. But here's the thing that I find really fascinating about this story, and what's really great about this, I really loved about this fortune telling scene, which is people will rejoice in your death. She doesn't specify which people. Because the implication there is that he was like a bad king, right? And that the whole country is like, yeah, fuck that guy. I'm glad he's dead.
He's dead.
That is not necessarily true about King Aegon V. He was very popular among the small folk, allegedly. And he, in the time of his reign, very similar to his grandfather and his uncle Baelor was into, this idea that they needed to rule with sort of a soft power and be more populist, I guess would be a good way of describing it. He took a lot of steps to improve the lives of the small folk and put a lot of protections in place for the small folk so that their lords could not abuse them. So the people that would celebrate Egg's death would actually be all the highborn lords at the end.
Nice.
There. So it's like the allegedly very shitty Tydos Lannister, Tywin's father, would have been very happy about Egg dying because he did not appreciate those policies. And very notably later in history, one king later, right, Egg is succeeded by his second son, Jaehaerys. Jaehaerys is succeeded by his son, Aerys, who is later known as the Mad King. And during the reign of the Mad King, he has a hand of the king named Tywin Lannister who comes along and rolls back pretty much all of the protections for the small folk that Aegon puts in place. So like it is Tywin Lannister who comes through and is like, I'm going to undo all of the good work that Egg did throughout his reign that made the small folk actually like him. And I think that's interesting because of the way the arc of this potentially Duncan Egg's 12 season series goes is we begin with this scene with Aerion where we see how much the small folk just does not fuck with the Targaryens, right?
Yeah.
They don't like them for good reason. The Targaryen brand has never been at a sort of more precarious state, especially after the Dance of Dragons wipes out all the dragons and strips them of their sort of overwhelming power. They then go through this period where they lose popularity and they're fighting amongst themselves and the Blackfires begin to rise up against them. And it's just like this constant where the small folk are having a bad time and they're just watching the Targaryens have to put down rebellion after rebellion after rebellion. And Egg comes along, and even though he has to also put down a bunch of rebellions, he at least tries to make the lives of the small folk better. And that is one of the reasons why people kind of liked him. But he's not popular among the lords. Although, who knows, maybe the Baratheons liked him. I don't remember how long Sir Lionel lasts.
Well, we'll, I guess, find out that part together.
Exactly.
But I'm very happy that the people who are going to be happy are his enemies, and I'm going to start the conspiracy theory now that I hope at least that the lore that he's trying to birth some dragons is at least somewhat exaggerated, and Egg doesn't accidentally burn himself and his best friend to death.
I mean,
Okay, I'm trying.
it is a very tragic way for his story to end if that's the case. But in very George R.R. Martin ways, I think that's a very tragic yet interesting way to connect this story that he's telling to the next story that he's telling, right?
Yes.
Where it's like Egg fails to bring back dragons, but those eggs are then lost and eventually end up in Daenerys' hands, and she is the magical prince that is promised, and she is the one who actually does bring back dragons. And then something else happens that is different than the way Game of Thrones actually ended, that George, I'm sure, will tell us eventually, maybe.
Good to know. Can't wait. Gonna buy Winds of Winter, and it came out. I've been saying for 15 years, I guess.
If and when, man. If and when.
If and when. All right. I do have some answers to our fun games we've been playing in terms of tracking things. But before that, it looks like from our next week on trailer, we are going exactly where we talked about last week, where we're gonna have a trial by 7 that is going to happen. My question is, given this trailer and presumably the things that are coming up, we know that I think this week's episode at 31 minutes is the shortest episode that there have been, even though I hear that tomorrow might also be 31 or 32 minutes.
Sure.
So we don't have that much time. When do you think we're going to get these flashbacks we've been seeing in the trailers? Because the Sir Riesling jousting was a really interesting example where the fandom was sort of like, where do we put this? Is there like a day of tournament that we're going to do? It doesn't seem like we have time for it. It's because we aren't used to the show having flashbacks. So that's a great way to showing it. But granted that we have seen some flashbacks, I assumed it would maybe be this episode, given Egg's song, that we were going to get a flashback to the putting down of the first Blackfire Rebellion. But where do you think it fits now? Does it fit with like a Dunk gets brought up on trial and they say like, who is this guy? And we have to go see who this guy is.
Well, I think it's somewhere over the next 2 episodes. And I will be curious to see next week how long Dunk is in custody, because the way it plays out in the book is Dunk is obviously jailed by Lord Ashford, and they're deciding what to do with him, and this involves Egg talking to his family, putting his little princely garb back on, which we see in the trailer, and them dealing with Arian. I think even Darren comes back at this point. Like they find brother number 3. And
he's the one who shaved the head, right?
I think so, yeah. He drunkenly stumbles into the picture, and he also kind of gets involved in this. We don't see him in the trailer, but he is in the books in the conversation about what to do with Dunk. And they're going to have to spend some time explaining what a trial of 7 is, because it's very different than the previous trial by combats that we've seen in Westeros. It involves a 7v7. It's only notably happened twice. Well, this is one of the 2 times it's happened. It happened once way back in the day in like 42 AC. A Targaryen king was challenged by warriors of the faith, and that one notably did not go well for anybody. The Targaryen king, I think it was Maegor, was the last one standing. The other 13 dudes died, and even he, despite the fact that he was the last one standing, like was so injured at the end he passed out for several weeks. So like it was really, really gnarly and bloody. This one goes a little bit differently, but this still not great. So there is potential with Dunk like sitting in his cell. Obviously he's going to have some heart-to-heart moments with Egg, but maybe he has some time to reflect on his life, maybe think back. And then, after they decide that it's trial of 7 time, they obviously let him out because he has to go and recruit 6 other people to be on his side.
Which also looks like is in the trailer for next week.
Interestingly enough, like my assumption would have been that next week would kind of end with Dunk leaving custody, and then like we have a whole episode of him trying to find more knights, but maybe we get a little bit of that here in the next episode. And then I really still think that the actual trial is the final episode. I'm sticking to this prediction because of the way the book finishes and because of how faithfully the rhythm of the show has mirrored the book, is that like it all just sort of happens right at the end, and then the whole story just wraps up really quickly after the trial of the seven. So I don't think there's a whole lot for them to do afterwards. So I think that there could be a lot of time, especially in that 5th episode, to stop and look back as Dunk is trying to convince people to get on his side. Maybe he starts telling stories or thinking back to his previous life. Because there's a lot of big decisions that people are going to have to make in this story of who wants to fight on whose side and who actually wants to fight and who actually wants to sit in the stands, sort of deal. And I think that we've encountered a lot of the people who are going to fight, but we have not necessarily positioned them in a place where we think of them as they're going to be the fighters. And I think that is going to take some time.
That's going to bring me to my answers to your fun games.
All right.
After our preview episode, you said one of the Targaryens of the story famously dies later in life after drinking wildfire, thinking it would turn him into a dragon. Absolutely, it's Aerion.
Final answer?
Yes, it's unless it's the drunken one, but yes.
It's Aerion.
Like
it's 100%.
The second I saw his armor, I was like, okay. And then like his psychopath instincts at the end.
He really solidifies it this week that he believes he's the dragon. Now, I guess that is kind of a spoiler that he makes it out of this story because it happens much later in his life and he doesn't drink wildfire here, but you know, he's a slippery little fella.
And then starting last week, we had Guess the Seven, which 7 nights will be on Team Dunk, since I learned last week what the Trial of the Seven is. And I think I've got at least some of the whys. And this is why I want to talk about it. Literally whys because it's Y in their name, not whys in like motivation. But I am going to try to figure out motivation. Mm-hmm. And I think it has something to do with maybe where these flashbacks could color some things.
Sure.
So we have Dunk. Sure. He's one of the 7 because he's the primary.
Mm-hmm.
Lionel with a Y, because it seems to be one of our friendlies.
Yeah.
Seems to owe Dunk some tug of war debts, which I guess he's going to take too far.
Yeah, he also just seems like he's just game. And he likes Dunk, so like why not?
Squire Raymond Fossaway, I'd say his first name because I want to get a Y in there.
Yeah. Now,
but I figure
there is a hurdle for him to cross. He is only a squire, and you need a knight.
That is true. But I also know that we have the Apple Showdown coming up, and what better way to make a green apple house by Sir Raymond Fossaway sort of splitting away under some other knighthood. So I'm going to guess that.
Sure.
Luckily, Robin Riesling has 2 Ys in both of his name. Because I'm like, the second this character shows up and he's like, I bring the chaos when the chaos needs to be brought. I'm like, this is either on the opposing team or on our team, and I hope it's on our team.
Oh, no. I mean, he's so likable. He's right on time.
Good. And then I have maybe Humphrey Harding, and I just have horse revenge because nobody likes the Targaryens,
right?
And like this is a real pardon the American specific reference. This is a real Luigi Mangione moment where a small folk dude stepped up and punched a Targaryen in the gob. I feel like this is a great time for other people to take out their frustration on the Targaryens. So, because outside of Humphrey Harding, I don't have any other good guesses. My guess would be maybe these flashbacks illuminate a little bit more on houses that would have like a historical recent grudge against the Targaryens that they'd be willing to piggyback on Dunk's little trial to maybe save some face or do it in a way that would make sense. So, like, there are other characters I like as options, but I don't think it makes sense. Like Madford Dondarrion, I think he's just there for the girls.
Sure. Yeah, he doesn't seem like much of a fighter.
No. Kingsguard won't turn, as you pointed out last week. They're not going to fight a Targaryen. So even though I like Sir Donal for Crabber justice, that's not going to be happening.
Right.
And then I also think
they may be on the other side,
Ooh, yeah.
right?
And then I think
Because
Valar
Arian also needs
won't-
to get 6 knights on his side of the cause.
That's true. I should be putting just like the show doesn't have enough time to introduce errant knights, so that's how I should have done it, is sort them into 2 categories, which I guess means I would put Valar Targaryen just on basis of having a last name on the same side as the Targaryens. But it is they do sort of tease at this point that Arian wants to fight him and humiliate him in the joust, so he was one of my guesses, but I don't feel great about any of those.
Sure.
But I do like all of our dudes with Ys in their names as potentials for Dunk.
I actually like that as a criterion for that, for Team Dunk. The Ys definitely have a lean, and I think you're onto something there. I don't think that applies fully to the entire team. No, it doesn't. But it actually kind of fits for most of them. So, but here's the thing. There is one, like I said, we've encountered 6, including Dunk. There's one that we have just like not encountered at all. We haven't even seen the banner for. So I'm kind of curious as to whether the show will swap in a different character for this person.
I'm a traveling stock coming down from the...
No way it's a Stark. But like, you know, we saw a Tully was, by the way. Like, could they swap in a Tully for a more recognizable? Ooh, yeah. Like, I'll tell you who it is, because we haven't seen them, and I've mentioned them several times, and I'm kind of frustrated that we haven't seen them yet. But we have
the bees.
We haven't seen a bees yet. We haven't seen the Beesbury, and he's another Humphrey. And he was supposed to be the Battle of the Humphreys. It was before Humphrey Harding goes up against Arian. They have a Humphrey Harding versus Humphrey Beesbury battle, and it's kind of great. And they both eventually lean on into Team Dunk for their own reasons. You know, I think you nailed it with Humphrey Harding. He's pissed about his horse and his leg. But we haven't seen any Beesbury. We haven't even seen the banner yet. So I wonder if they're going to make a change and swap in somebody else. My guess would be the Tully guy, the fish biting Tully guy, because if you're going to swap somebody, you maybe need a more you would do it for a more recognizable house, right? For the show watchers. That would be my assumption. Right, because
I mean, yeah, that's why I made the stupid joke that it would have to be a Stark. But I guess Tully's good,
Tully
and
would be a good one.
He did have the show moment. I guess you could also, that could be a reason we have the stupid Ashford subplot.
Maybe
because it's that other Ashford knight.
The thing is, you kind of can't have it be anybody would be too aligned with the crown, right? So it's like it wouldn't be a Lannister. It wouldn't be a fucking Highgarden. What's the?
But like,
why am I blanking on the Tyrell? Like, it wouldn't be a Tyrell because they're like a huge rich lord who is like one step removed from the Targaryens. It wouldn't be the host necessarily.
But like, if they're willing to back Dunk to have a financial win.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean they're going to put Ashford on one side of it? Do they put him on the Targaryen side so he throws? Like,
no, not necessarily. I don't think they would do that, because this, as we will find out, as I imagine someone is going to explain to Dunk very quickly, this is not a tourney game. This gets serious very quickly. Like, I think it maybe even is Raymond Fossaway who explains this to Dunk, where it's like, we're not using, you know, the same weapons anymore. This is like real shit. And that the only way for a trial of 7 to end, there's 2 ways it can end. Either the accuser needs to renounce their claim, like Arian needs to give up his accusation against Dunk, or he needs to die. Like, that's it. It's not just like he knocks him off his horse and like, you know, he'd lose his points. This is as serious as the Mountain versus the Viper. Like, this is for the whole bag of beans. And so like
now
this is why, as Dunk will experience, assembling this crew is not going to be easy. And I think that's another thing we see in the trailer, which is like Dunk giving this huge speech where he's like, is there no true knights of the realm here? You know, because initially nobody wants to be on his team because they're like, well, I'm not going to fight the Targaryens.
I had like 10 on podcast minutes where I thought Aerion being alive to drink wildfire wasn't as big of a deal. But now that you put it that way, can't wait to see how this trial of the seven turns out, given that I think both people
I guess it's wild because you know that they both live, because there can't be more Dunk and Egg stories if Dunk dies here, and Aerion can't drink wildfire later in life if he dies here. So
yeah. Good. See, not all spoilers take away the dramatic tension of what's actually going to be happening.
Sure. But, you know, I mean, it is a George R.R. Martin story, so someone's got to go.
Oh, yeah. No, I think some horrible things for all those other houses that I just said I really liked. Bad time for the wise in a couple of weeks here. Neil, is there anything we need to talk about before Saturday?
I think we've kind of covered it. I don't want to go any deeper into who's going to be fighting in the seven. I will be curious to revisit this discussion after next week, because I am curious how quick they will be to reveal who's going to be on which team, because there's some really interesting ones that we haven't even touched on yet here in the Storm that I think people may be like, I didn't see that coming. And that could happen this coming week, but that also might be something they save for later. And that plays into what I think will, and this goes back to your question that you asked in the call, which is, how will this season be remembered? Will it be remembered for the egg twist?
Mm-hmm.
There is something that will happen after the trial of the seven that I think will be more memorable than the egg twist. And it involves a character dying. And when I read it in the book, like, you know, I've always told the story about reading A Storm of Swords and throwing the book across the room right after reading The Red Wedding. This isn't a throwing the book across the room moment, but I raised my arm to almost throw the book across. This particular book, I have The Night of the Seven Kingdoms, the one with all three novellas in it. It's a hardcover. This would have done more damage to the wall than my paperback Storm of Swords. But I was pretty upset when I got to the end of the Hedge Knight, and because it's like, oh shit. So I do think there is a bigger oh shit than the reveal of who Egg is, that happens right here at the end. And I'm excited to see if anyone sees it coming. I don't think they will.
Great. Can't wait for that to keep me up at night. Luckily, thanks to that superb owl, we'll be getting an episode earlier as usual. So one more time, we get it Friday at midnight, it seems, which means Neil and I will be back on this podcast Saturday afternoon or early evening when we return to Westeros for the Night of the Seven Kingdoms, episode 4. It's titled 7, so I expect a lot of lore, both maybe vaguely religion related, but definitely combat related as we move forward. So go out there, be excellent to each other, save the goose, just make the breakfast sandwich.